Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. My name is Surina and I'm a junior doctor and I like making these videos in my spare time, so thank you so much for joining me. Today I'm introducing a video where I've sat down and gone through the entire process of getting a junior doctor job in Australia as a UK graduate. Since filming this video, I've decided to split it into two parts for a couple of reasons. Firstly, it was a very long video, and secondly, for you guys watching this, I thought it would be easier to split the application process into two parts, and you can dip into the two videos depending on which stage of the process you're currently at. The first part, so this video, will be looking at the decision to go to Australia and how to start applying for jobs. The second part will be taking a deeper dive into the nitty-gritty of all the paperwork, so from when you're applying to getting the job offer and everything that comes after that. Feel free to use the timestamps in the description below or skip ahead to part 2 depending on which stage of the journey you're on. A little bit about me. I am a UK graduate, so I studied there and worked there as a doctor for my first 2 years of my foundation program. Then I took a career break, often known as an F3 year, which is what I'm currently doing, and I chose to come to Australia in my F3. I've done a whole video talking about all the reasons I chose to come here, so feel free to check that out first if you want. I'm currently working as a resident medical officer in a central hospital in Brisbane, the Royal Brisbane and Women's Hospital in Queensland, but I applied to tons of other places. This video will be based on my own experiences, so it will be mainly aimed at UK graduates as well, hoping to come and work in Australia at around an F3 point in their career. Firstly, as obvious as it may sound, you need to make the decision that you do want to come to Australia. On face value, it's an absolutely great decision. There's lots of job opportunities out here for UK graduates. There's very varied jobs, they're pretty well paid, and of course living in Australia is an absolute dream if you're looking to travel and have lots of amazing adventures whilst you're here. But of course do consider that it is really far away from the UK. As well as the distance, there is a lot of paperwork and a lot of associated costs that you need to know about. So just make sure you're okay with all these things before you dive into this long journey of applying for a job in Australia. First, let's start with how to choose a location. Australia is a massive country with lots of different states that have very different characteristics. The first is deciding between more city-centric and rural jobs. There are parts of Australia that are completely isolated and removed from cities and don't have very good links to them either. So working in those places will be very different to working in or near a city. As well as lifestyle differences, there's also healthcare disparities to take into consideration. I understand there is a lot of varied healthcare between rural and more metropolitan areas, and working as a doctor, as a healthcare professional, yes, this might come with a bit more independence and responsibility, but of course there may be less support and you may find yourself with less resources than perhaps you might be used to. I didn't really have a location strategy because in the middle of the pandemic I didn't know what the job market was like, so I applied absolutely everywhere, and the rural places I happened to apply to definitely got back a lot sooner. From what I understand, their pay is also a lot more attractive to encourage people to take up those jobs. But as I got deeper into the application process, I realised I definitely wanted to focus on a city, and therefore Brisbane, Sydney, Melbourne were my top choices. And Brisbane was the first city to get back to me, which is why I took up that offer. Another part of Australian geography to consider is, of course, the weather. From my experiences travelling to Melbourne and Sydney, they had very similar weather to the UK. Obviously, overall a lot warmer, but generally cloudy days, grey and rainy days were a lot more common. But Queensland, the state I'm in, is actually known as the Sunshine State because of how much sun it gets all year round, and the climate is generally really pleasant and warm for the whole year as well. Or I was told. I'm speaking about a week after being totally flooded into my flat and seeing Brisbane literally go underwater because of how much rain there's been this summer. I'm told this isn't usual, but I have to say the last 6-7 months on the whole have been really sunny, really nice and warm, and that's been a really enjoyable climate to live in, a big change from back home. Speaking of Queensland, on a personal note, I cannot recommend it enough. Queensland has absolutely blown me away with how much natural beauty there is in terms of the reefs, rainforests, mountains, and of course beaches. Yeah, I can't recommend Queensland enough. Okay, so you've decided you want to come to Australia and had to think about a few locations you'd like to work in. Next, it's time to understand the Australian healthcare system a little. Largely, it is very similar to the UK, and in terms of the doctor jobs available, there are training and non-training posts. There's no real way that you can come straight onto a training program in Australia because that requires a little bit more work, but there are lots of non-training jobs like the one I'm on available for UK graduates. In terms of the positions here is a diagram explaining that as a postgraduate year 3 doctor, so 3 years after graduating, I am eligible to apply for SHO jobs, also known as resident medical officer jobs. A doctor in the first 3 years of post-graduation is known as a resident medical officer. That goes from intern level at PGY1 to junior house officer at PGY2 to senior house officer at PGY3, which is where I am. If you're also coming at a similar time to me, perhaps F3, F4 time, then I would consider looking for RMO jobs as well. The next step up is in the blue box in this diagram, which is the principal house officers or PHOs. PHOs are also non-training positions, but they are more a registrar level. So it's definitely a step up in terms of responsibilities and expectations. So I'd probably apply for those jobs if you have a few more years of postgraduate experience. I've got a few friends here who've come from the UK straight into PHO jobs rather than RMO jobs, and I think they are all F4 at a minimum. So I'd probably recommend at least that much experience before you apply for those jobs. I'll post a website where this diagram is from because it also had really helpful, more detailed position descriptions if you want to have a read and find out more. The next differentiation between jobs here are rotational versus non-rotational jobs. Rotational jobs are very similar to your F1 and F2 jobs in the UK in that you spend your time rotating between different specialities. The terms here are around 10 to 12 weeks each, so you'll spend that much time in different specialities. I found you can have quite a lot of flexibility about the rotations you do. You can let the hospitals know if you're more medically inclined or surgically inclined, or ask for specific jobs that you'd like included in your rotations. I let my hospital know that I wanted pretty much only surgery or ED jobs, and so when I got here I spent half a term, so 5 weeks, in a vascular surgery job. Then I spent a whole term in a day surgery unit, and now I'm spending a whole term on ED. And for the rest of this year, I've got more surgical jobs lined up as well, including breast and endocrine surgery and neurosurgery, which I might try and swap because neurosurgery. Non-rotational jobs are what they say on the tin. You spend the vast majority of your year or the whole year in one job. ED is a very common speciality to do a non-rotational job in. I've got quite a few friends doing ED jobs at my hospital for the whole year. It is a place you'll commonly find a lot of British doctors in because those jobs tend to be fairly easy to get for UK graduates. Next, you need to check whether you're eligible to work in the Australian healthcare system. If you're an international medical graduate, then you need to be deemed eligible to work in Australia by one of 3 pathways, I believe. If you're from the UK at a similar time to training in me, you'll be eligible for the Competent Authority pathway. This is the pathway for international graduates who are currently registered with another international authority that Australia have decided makes you legit enough to be a doctor in Australia as well. This is the list of authorities that Australia has approved, and as you can see, the GMC from the UK is on there. So if you hold full GMC registration, then you're eligible to apply to work in Australia through this competent authority pathway. Next to the GMC in this list, it says you're eligible whether you've gone through the PLAB route to the GMC or whether you've done a GMC accredited course in the UK itself. If you meet this criteria, you can apply for provisional registration, and after working for 12 months here, I'll be able to apply for full registration. The other 2 pathways I'm not very familiar with, but they are the specialist pathway, which, as the name suggests, are for people who have done some, if not all, of their specialty training in another country already. And then there is the standard pathway for people who don't fall into either of the other 2 categories, and it does involve doing some exams, but I'm not too sure about that. If you meet the criteria for the competent authority pathway, there are no further exams you need to do. You just need to apply for provisional registration and then follow all the steps that come after, which we'll talk about later. I'll put some links for websites with all of this information in the description below. Right, so let's next talk about the time frame. The Australian working year begins and ends in January, but the UK one begins and ends in August. So if you are finishing F2 in August, you've got two options. Either you go straight into Australia and apply for their mid-year intake, because they are looking for doctors in August time to fill gaps and things, so there are jobs at that point. Or you can do something else for 6 months, have a break or whatever, and apply for jobs starting in January at the beginning of Australia's next year. And what most F3s do is apply for the mid-year intake to go pretty much straight from F2 into a job in Australia starting in August as well. I started looking in around January time for August jobs, and I found most hospitals were looking around this time for mid-year intake, with job applications closing between February and April. But then again, lots of hospitals hadn't even opened their recruitment processes by this point, so it honestly was just pot luck who was looking and who wasn't when I started applying. I applied for the position in my current hospital in January 2021. I was shortlisted by February, and then I was sent my job offer towards the end of March. I know friends who applied a lot later but got jobs in New South Wales and Victoria from hospitals who told me they weren't currently looking because I'd applied a bit earlier. So like I said, it was just kind of pot luck at what time you apply and what hospitals are looking at that point. I would say now is definitely a very good time to get stuck in if you're looking for August jobs. Some may have already closed by now, but there'll definitely be some still looking as well. Right, let's talk about actually how to apply. Probably one of the most common questions I'm sent on my Instagram. Follow there if you want to. There are two main ways to apply. One is through directly contacting the hospitals, and that is what I would recommend. And the second way is through a formal recruitment website or portal, which some of the hospitals or states use and where they advertise all their jobs on. I applied through a mixture of these ways, like I said, and it basically varied a lot depending on the state. Starting with Queensland, which is where I'm working and was probably the most straightforward place to apply, because they have this one website page which not only has all the details of how you apply and what you need, it also has a whole long list of every hospital in Queensland with all their email addresses for the recruitment officers next to it, so you can literally just go down emailing every single one, which is pretty much what I did. And it was through this that various people got back to me with either more information or interviews or whatever I needed to do for the next step. I will link that website in the description below. New South Wales has an online portal where they advertise all of their jobs, so you have to keep on checking, or you can set specific alerts for the jobs you're looking for, and if you see a job that suits your criteria and is in a location you're interested in, then you go through and fill whatever forms etc. they ask you to fill. However, I also still emailed other hospitals that were either not listed on there or had slightly different jobs to what I was looking for, asking if they were still considering RMOs, or if they were advertising for a January job, I'd email asking if they would consider some August intake as well. It's a really good resource to apply for jobs through, but I would definitely still advise emailing hospitals directly rather than waiting for a job position to come up on the portal. Victoria was also a mixture of portals and directly emailing hospitals, and Western Australia, where I only applied for maybe 1 or 2 jobs, had a central website, again similar to Queensland, where you can do all your applications through. Essentially, it is really messy and quite difficult to find out when you start on your journey of applying where to email and who to contact. So I'll include all the key websites I've mentioned in the description below, but I'll also include a document which I've made from my own research and with the help of some friends, which will include not only those key websites, but also specific email addresses that we've used to contact various hospitals. So feel free to check that out. If there are more contact details that you know of that aren't on there, then please feel free to message me or comment down below, and I'll keep adding them to make it a useful resource that we can just all use to help each other. If you're doing your own research, then of course you can just type in hospital name plus recruitment officer into Google, and you should get some email addresses through that method as well. The last place I would really recommend checking out are some Facebook groups. There are lots of Facebook groups specifically for international graduates, UK graduates wanting to come to Australia, and there is always conversation on there about contact details, about places that people know of that are looking for more doctors. So definitely join those groups. I will link those in the description below as well. Finally, I know there are also recruitment agencies which help international graduates get jobs in Australia, but I was advised not to use them because the hospitals don't like using them, as obviously it costs them more money to recruit that way. So I didn't use any. But I'm sure, again, if you have a quick Google, you'll be able to find recruitment agencies who are helping you get the kind of jobs you're looking for. An important point at this stage, you will be sending tons of emails at this point, and you may not hear very much for quite a while. Unfortunately, it is a bit of a waiting game and you have to be very patient. I went a little bit crazy and applied to, I think, probably 20, maybe even 30 different places because I wasn't sure what the job market was during the pandemic and what my chances were of getting a job, but I didn't really hear very much for quite a while. So you have to be a little bit patient, and it is an uncertain time, but slowly and surely the replies will start trickling in. Next obvious question is, what do I email to all these hospitals? And obviously you need a nice, lovely email saying who you are, what jobs you're looking for, and when you can start. But I would also attach a cover letter and a CV to speed things up a little. I won't go into too much detail in this video, but briefly, a cover letter should be around a page long. I usually start with who I am and what position I currently hold as a doctor. Then I would talk about what jobs I am looking to apply for. Then I would go into a brief summary of my career so far, talking about clinical and academic and teaching components and achievements. Then I like to add a little bit of personality about why I want to come to Australia. And yeah, you just kind of want to introduce yourself and your vibe to the employer. So of course keep it formal, but make it nice and friendly as well. Next, I also attached my CV. Generally like to keep it around 2 pages. I just break it down into very simple subheadings. So my employment history, any relevant courses I've done, and then all the academic stuff like posters, presentations, publications, etc. I just clearly laid it out in tables in chronological order, so someone can just have a quick flick through and quickly decide whether you're suitable and eligible for the job. So yeah, get those 2 documents ready as early as possible and just make sure you're sending it out to everyone as attachments in your emails. So that's everything for part 1. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you found it useful. If you want to know more about the paperwork of applying and everything that comes after accepting a job offer, then head to part 2 of this mini series. Or of course, feel free to drop your questions in the comments below and I will try and answer them. If you want to know more about my time in Australia, then feel free to check out the other videos on my channel. Thank you so much for watching and see you next time.